Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for getting up so early. It takes a group of Austin women to come up with the idea of a 7:30 a.m. event, right? You know? I'm really, truly honored to be here in this room with so many amazing and fearless Austin women. And I'm excited to talk to you this morning about what it takes to succeed in life and what public policies have to do with that. As Americans, and especially as Texans, I'm trying to get this up a tiny bit more. There we go. Is that good? Yeah. As Americans, and especially as Texans, we tend to be rugged individualists. We think of our chances in life as mainly dictated by our own actions. If we work hard, we get ahead, right? And of course, our personal abilities and choices do impact whether we achieve our goals in life. But so do many other factors, as you all know, including our family history and public policies. In fact, public policies and family history influence our lives way before we're even born. Think about life as a game of Monopoly. Whether or not you succeed depends a little on your skills and strategy, but also on what you get before the game begins, what opportunities come your way during the game, and how you're helped along the way. To illustrate my point, I'm going to share a little bit about my own personal life story. And I'm actually going to tell 3 versions of that story to highlight 3 sets of factors that affected my experience. Think of these 3 layers as my chance cards: my own abilities, my family history, and the public policies that impacted my journey. And as I tell my story, I really invite all of you to think about your own life path and the chance cards that created opportunities and setbacks for you. So, here we go. Story number 1, smart and plucky. So I grew up in Dallas, and my early childhood was uneventful other than an occasional trip to the beach with my grandmother in her big old car, and a very pesky older brother who was always showing up with either a large gun or a bear. I loved school and was always a good student. I survived a few bad haircuts, but managed to graduate from high school and go on to college, come here to Austin. I went to UT, and then I went on to law school. And I was actually able to pay my own way through all of my degrees, which is a real challenge today, as you know. I moved to New York City and became a social justice lawyer, and in fact even had the chance to argue before the Supreme Court. In New York City, I fell in love, I got married, had my son. And then after a few years, I actually decided to move back to my home state of Texas, which is very beloved to me, and throw myself into the fight for the future of the state. So hearing this version of the story, right, what do you get? You might come away thinking that it was all my personal smarts and hard work that got me where I am. Well, let's turn to the second version of the story. Maybe my family history has a little bit to do with it. So this is version 2, strong family roots. So I grew up in a stable, middle-class family up in Dallas. Both of my parents actually grew up in Kansas. They met in college. And my dad actually loved to fly, and he and his brother pooled their resources and started a little charter air service in Topeka, Kansas, which unfortunately was destroyed by a terrible tornado there. That was like a bad chance card they weren't expecting. And as a result, my dad went to work for Sears Roebuck, where he worked for many decades, and they moved us to Texas, which is how I ended up in Dallas. My mom was a teacher, and she was a very beloved teacher and won lots of awards. And believe it or not, their modest income in those 2 jobs was enough to pay for a house, 2 cars, and even a small airplane, which we used to fly back and forth to visit all the relatives in Oklahoma and Kansas. So what about their background? What are their roots? Well, my grandparents on my mom's side were both teachers as well, and my grandpa was a coach, as you can see in the picture, with one of his basketball teams. And they actually got married during the Depression, and it was a struggle. Their families couldn't afford a wedding, and so they eloped, and I actually still wear my grandmother's little Depression-era tiny little gold wedding band just to remind me of the hard times in our family. And my grandpa, the other dapper-looking dude in the string bow tie, actually worked at a local department store called Pelletier's. My grandmother on that side was able to stay at home to raise the kids because back then, believe it or not, one income was actually enough to support a family. What about before that? Well, the generation before were pretty much merchants, farmers, and ranchers in Kansas. My great-grandfather McCord was actually a country doctor. And then there was the generation before that. And you see this like young woman in the middle of the screen. That's my great-great-grandmother, Carrie Berry McDonald. And that's actually also her in the next picture over, the older woman with 5 generations of moms in my family. And she, and the story always goes, Carrie Berry McDonald actually traveled to Kansas from Pennsylvania in a covered wagon. And in fact, most of my family were actually immigrants that traveled west, you know, and settled. And you see this kind of faded old picture. That's my great-great-grandfather, Lorenzo Bateman, who shot that bear that's skinned in the background, and, you know, many pioneers. Before that, you might not be surprised to hear that my family roots are mainly originally in England, and you can tell that by my name and all the other names, Beeson, you know, Bateman, Barnett, Trimmel, Spillman. Well, unsurprisingly, MacDonald, McCord, we all came from kind of England and Scotland. And in fact, the Beesons came over originally as part of the original William Penn Quaker colony. They were escaping religious persecution. So again, what do you hear from this version of the story? Well, you hear that, you know, maybe I get my strength or whatever from my strong family roots and the pioneer spirit of my family, all right? Well, here's the other thing that's going on, and I don't think you're going to be surprised to hear that in this room. There was another set of chance cards that impacted my chance of success in life, and that was public policies. So the third version of the story. Public policies actually made it much more likely for my family to succeed over the last several generations. And these are public policies that helped to build one of the largest middle classes the world has ever known in the U.S. in the 1950s and 60s. So I was very lucky. I benefited from very well-funded public schools. That's my elementary school, Charles A. Gill in Dallas. And when I went to UT, the tuition was actually very affordable. And as I said earlier, I was actually able to pay all of my tuition and my rent and all my living expenses just by working part-time and full-time in the summer. In fact, my rent, I had my first little apartment, was just right down here. It was on the south shore of what was then just called Town Lake, as the older people in the room will know. And it was $325 for a little efficiency apartment. There was no boardwalk there then, but it was still quite lovely, I can assure you. So my parents, of course, also benefited from many good policies. My dad was in the Navy, and so the GI Bill actually paid for him to go to college and also gave him a very low-cost loan for the first house that they owned. And because my grandparents were teachers and homeowners and merchants during the Depression, they were actually able to weather the Depression and the Dust Bowl more so than other families. But when you start to look a little bit beneath the surface, what do you see about some of the public policies that helped, that benefited my family? Well, they didn't benefit all families, right? We begin to uncover policies that aren't fair, that discriminate against some people while advantaging other people. My mom actually still holds a grudge against the first mortgage lender that they went to, who refused to give them a mortgage because they wouldn't count her salary as a teacher as income. It didn't count as income back then. And she also, you know, still grumbles about never having made the same salary as the male teachers in the schools where she taught. My dad benefited from going to a segregated school in Topeka, Kansas. That was just in the few years before the Supreme Court ended the separate but equal doctrine in Brown versus Board of Education. So he was able to go to a better school than the kids of color in Topeka. And the GI Bill, unfortunately, even though it benefited my family, was essentially unavailable to veterans of color, both because black men and Hispanic men were unable to get into the best colleges and because they were unable to buy those suburban homes that were available to white families like mine. The mortgages were never approved. Even farther back than that, of course, you really start to see some of the pernicious policies from earlier on in our country's history. And the fact that my ancestors were able to homestead, of course, was because of the forcible removal and killing of the Native Americans. And that was all going on while slavery was still legal in this country. That's a part of the American story that we don't like to talk about a lot, and that many of us would rather forget, but it's important to understand how past and current policies create inequities that still impact families to this day. And from this version of the story, it becomes clear that I got I was able to succeed in life because of some good policies that helped everyone, like the school policies and the tuition, some policies that helped men but not women, and some policies that benefited white families like mine while discriminating against many families of color. So how is this story relevant to today's challenges? Well, just as policies impacted my own chances in life, they impact whether or not Texas men and women and families will succeed today. So let's look at a little bit of data about Austin and Central Texas. As you heard, we're big believers in data at the Center for Public Policy Priorities, just as is the Austin Community Foundation and the Women's Fund, and it is important to know what's going on here in our area. It's troubling to look at because, in fact, a girl born into a similar family as mine, 30, 40 years ago, would face much greater obstacles today. 1 in 5 children live in poverty in Central Texas, and 56% of the school kids in our schools qualify for free or reduced meals, which means that those are low-income families that really struggle to make ends meet. In terms of wages, we like to talk a lot about Texas being a job creator, and we are great at creating jobs here in Texas, but unfortunately they don't pay enough to make ends meet a lot of the time. We have too many low-wage jobs, and in fact, 24% of our full-time jobs in Texas pay less than $25,000 a year, which any of you with family budgets know is not enough to get by. For our single mom with 2 kids, 61% of the jobs in our area in Central Texas don't pay enough to make ends meet. In terms of education, much has changed. State funding for schools and for colleges has dramatically decreased at the same time that the cost of colleges has actually skyrocketed. And so so it's very challenging for low-income people to be able to afford college, and only 11% of eligible Texas students receive financial aid. Only 1 in 10 low-income students are actually able to complete college, and that is a number that should really disturb and worry all of you, because we know that in order to get into those living wage jobs, you have to have a college degree, and too many of our kids are being lost in the kind of leaky pipeline because of the high cost of college and other challenges. Housing, we already talked about before. It's so great that the Women's Fund is supporting affordable housing. It costs $20 an hour. You have to make $20 an hour to be able to pay for a 2-bedroom apartment in Central Texas, and many of you know that's not even a particularly nice apartment. And if you're a single mom, 60% of our single moms pay more than 30% of their income for housing, which makes them housing burdened and really creates real financial challenges for them and their families. In terms of childcare, again, we have 20% of our households, that's a high number with kids in Travis County, are actually headed by single women. And we know that childcare is way too expensive, and that unfortunately way too providers actually accept subsidies. So we really need great programs like the ones that you support here at the Women's Fund. Healthcare, too. First of all, we have the highest rate of uninsured people in Texas of any state in the nation, and that's because, unlike other states, we failed to close what's called the coverage gap, which basically creates a much larger number of low-income people who are unable to get access to healthcare through the Affordable Health Act. And we also have, too high of a rate of teen pregnancy. 33 births per 1,000 girls in Travis County, and that's higher than both the state and the national average. So why are we having these challenges? Well, first of all, I want to say, too, that all of those numbers, and if we had more time, I would have done the comparison, are even worse for girls and women of color. And that is, again, part of the residue of all of the policies that denied opportunity many generations back that I mentioned earlier in telling my own story. So the issue is not that we don't have enough resources. Let's be clear about that. We know that in this room with all of you generous women and men here today. We are actually lucky to live in a very wealthy state. Texas is a wealthy state. The issue is that we have allowed our public policies to continue to create barriers to opportunity instead of to expand opportunity. So that's the bad news, but the good news is that, as we've seen, policies are a little bit like chance cards, right? They can either expand opportunity or they can contract and deny opportunity to people. So I want to share just a few policies that we know, and these are evidence-based, fact-based public policies, would provide better chances for Texas girls, women, and families to reach their full potential. So first of all, wages. We know that one of the number one thing that we could do that would just make an impact overnight in Texas and the country, and certainly in Central Texas, would be to raise the minimum wage. We have got to pay a living wage so that families can make ends meet. It's also a big help, a big support to workers, especially women, to provide paid sick leave, and we're very lucky to now have access to paid sick leave for all workers in Austin. That's a campaign, that's a new policy you all know was just passed earlier this year, and CPPP was proud to be part of that campaign. In terms of education, we have to remodel our public school finance system. We haven't remodeled it since way back when I had that terrible haircut and I was in, I don't know, 3rd grade or something. We desperately need to remodel our public school finance system. And we also must provide more need-based grant aid to college students so that we don't have such a leaky pipeline. And we need to strengthen our education to workforce pipeline so that we are educating young people for the jobs that businesses need them to fill. In terms of housing, we must expand the number of affordable housing units, especially here in Texas. It's just such a major challenge, and we really need to protect against voucher discrimination. There's a real challenge here and in many other jurisdictions around the state of low-income people not being able to use their housing vouchers to rent apartments. In terms of childcare, this is a fantastic support. If we could just provide full-day pre-K to all kids, we would, number one, you talk about evidence-based, number one, we would dramatically increase the likelihood for those children to succeed in school, and we would provide a very important work support to mothers and fathers who need to work to make ends meet for the family budget. Another idea that we're excited about, which has actually been tested by is being piloted by the Dallas Women's Foundation, is to increase child care subsidies through a public-private partnership. And it's kind of the creation of a fund that actually provides matching dollars to sort of up the amount of subsidies that parents get for child care. In terms of healthcare, we need to close that coverage gap and reduce the number of uninsured people in Texas. It's really affecting a lot of women and girls. We need to expand outreach and enrollment, and we have got to provide more teenagers with access to birth control and comprehensive sex ed, and thank goodness we have Planned Parenthood to help do that. I want to, I hope that my stories and my data have been a little bit thought-provoking and have illuminated the critical role that public policy plays in whether or not women and families succeed. Of course, it's true that changing outcomes and policies takes a lot of work, and sometimes we can be frustrated by those folks up in that pink dome up the street, but nothing's going to change if we don't get active and engaged, and I know that if we work together, we can do that. I'm really excited, again, to be here in a room full of women willing to get up at 7:30 in the morning to come and hear about what more you can do while already doing many things, and so I thought I would share just a few final suggestions for how we might work together in this room. First of all, I want to just give a shout out of thanks to all the donors in the room who are already providing financial support to both direct service organizations like the great ones that got the grants this morning and to policy organizations like CPPP. I think that we could do a better job of strengthening feedback loops between direct service providers and policy groups. It's a really important model because it's so important for us, the policy wonks, to hear from you all who are helping women and families every day on the ground so that we can help identify and solve policy problems and also hear the real impact on people's lives of the policies that we try to help get passed. Another thing we could do, which you all, again, the Women's Fund are obviously pioneers in this, is to really use data to inform the programs that you're using to support women and families. And finally, I really want to make a plug for engaging in advocacy with your elected leaders. There are some there are nonprofits who are nervous about doing that, and I can understand why. And there are some limitations, but it is absolutely okay for nonprofits and obviously for you as individuals to engage in advocacy. You just need to get a little bit of advice about what those limits are. It's so important for the leaders, again, up the street to hear from you, the leaders both across the street, City Hall, and our state leaders to hear from you all and to hear your personal stories and to hear why you need those policy changes that we're all arguing for. So I feel like I feel very privileged to have had the good fortune of being born into a family, that was fairly privileged and to be able to benefit from the policies that got me where I am and that gave me a fair chance to succeed. I feel very strongly that if our democracy is to live up to its promise of opportunity and of equality, our policies must enable all Texans of all backgrounds to reach their full potential. We can't have a person's gender, race, ethnicity, and financial status influence the outcomes of their chances for life. And we need policies to both expand opportunity for everyone and close those gaps in equity. I feel it can be a little heavy sometimes to hear the bad statistics and the challenges that we face, but I honestly couldn't be more inspired than I have been in the last couple of years. My son's actually about to graduate from high school in just a couple of weeks, and he and his generation, as you all have seen, have been out there marching in the streets more than ever before. They really see what the challenges are that we are facing in our communities, in our country, and I feel very certain that with all of those young people out there, young girls, women running for office in greater numbers than ever before, and all of you in this room, we can, in fact, achieve what we want for our democracy and give all girls and women in Texas the chance to reach their full potential. Thank you so much.